Welcome back everybody to developing a dynamic website. This is the second video in the series and we're going to talk a little bit about getting set up for the project. So a couple of things we need to talk about are hosting and the software or the IDE we're going to use. So with the hosting, we have a couple options in front of us. We can do a local server, local being on your computer, using something like Xampp, which is a nice simple installer to install Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Perl. Or you can go with the remote hosting, which is done through a hosting company. We use HostGator.com for most of everything we do here, and they're pretty popular. There's a lot of options out there like Bluehost and GoDaddy, and I mean the sky's the limit with those. So most good hosting is going to cost you money. These days it's not very expensive. I mean, I think you can get, if you pay a year in advance, I think you can get hosting on HostGator for like between $5 and $6 a month for a pretty simple hosting plan. But if you don't want to pay for it, or you'd like to just set up a server on your local computer, you can go ahead and use Xampp, which I'm going to really quick show you how to use. Then for our IDE, I've talked in the last video that we're going to use Aptana. Now in the original series, and pretty much every video up until these most recent videos I've been putting out, we've used Adobe's Dreamweaver. And while that's still a great product, and you can follow along just as well in Dreamweaver, if that's what you're using, I wanted to show a free product that really has most of all the features that Dreamweaver has. In fact, it's got a lot better features. The more you get into development, you're going to notice that Dreamweaver is more of a professional / consumer product, whereas things like Aptana and some of the other IDEs out there are definitely more geared towards the serious pro developer. One thing you're lacking in Aptana, which in this series and as a professional developer, lacking probably isn't the right term, but you don't have the drag and drop features, being able to drag elements to the page and it automatically write the code for you. We're not doing that anyways, and 9 times out of 10 if you're doing this as a profession or doing professional work, you're going to be hand coding or at the very worst case copying and pasting your own code around, but most of this is going to be done by hand. So Aptana is great. Really any IDE you want to use, you can follow along. I mean, some of the things are going to be a little different as far as the way the program looks, but as long as you have an option to FTP, send files to the server, whether that's within the IDE or if you want to get a separate FTP program, that's up to you. I chose Aptana. A lot of the reason being because it has FTP built in, and it is pretty similar to Dreamweaver, so those following from previous videos aren't going to be completely lost if they're so used to that. So it's really up to you. So in Aptana, what we're going to do is we're going to run through how to set up a workspace and how to set up a remote connection if you are doing it remote instead of local. Then lastly, we're going to really quick run through GitHub, where I'm going to be hosting the code for this project. As we put out more videos, I'll be updating the code on there so people can download the code. So now back to the topic of hosting. We're going to look at how to install Xampp and get that running for you, as well as take a look at what's involved with a hosting company. So if you're going to go with a remote hosting company, I'm recommending HostGator just because I've used them forever. However, feel free to browse around and find one for yourself. Now, if it's offering something for completely free, then odds are there's some sort of gimmick or it's really limited. I mean, we even offer free hosting sometimes. Periodically, we open up like a set of 10 free hosting packages, and even ours is really limited. You should be able to do anything that we do in these videos with that, and we don't plaster your pages with ads and stuff, but a lot of times if you find free hosting, you're going to get ads plastered on your page, and that sucks. So if you're going to go remote, look for the companies. They're probably going to charge you starting at like $4 a month. And really, their basic plans usually will work for you. I recommend getting a Linux plan. So here, for example, on HostGator, this first plan here, the Hatchling plan, it says starting at $3.96 a month, but I'm pretty sure that's if you pay, yeah, if you pay 3 years in advance, then you get that deal. So if you're going to go month to month, then it's going to end up being about $7 a month. But this is perfect for what we're doing here. You really don't need anything crazy. When you get into serious development and building tons of websites, you might start looking at a virtual private server or even a dedicated server. In layman's terms, the difference between the two is a virtual private server, you get a lot of the same functionality of a dedicated server. It's almost like having your own real server set up just for you, but you're still technically sharing that computer with a couple other people. Whereas a dedicated server, you pretty much have your own computer sitting there. I forget where HostGator is located, but we'll just say in Arizona. So somewhere like in Arizona, you have a computer sitting there in a room, probably on a rack, and that is completely yours for the time being. You know that you're paying this month to month. Then the regular web hosting, you're pretty much sharing a computer with probably like 20 to 50 to 100, who knows how many other people. Now, they don't have access to your stuff, but you're sharing their resources. So if you're trying to run some really big website, which again we're not doing in this, and a lot of the websites you're probably going to work on aren't going to need something bigger than this. But just think of it as 20 people being logged into your own computer at the same time. I mean, it's going to run a little slower than it would if you had your own computer. So just really quick, if you're going to go with a hosting plan, most of this that I'm going to mention comes standard, but you're going to want to make sure that it has PHP installed, and I recommend a newer version of PHP. It doesn't need to be the most recent, but 5 would do. Anything lower than that, and it's going to be using a little bit different code than we're using, or syntax. Then you want MySQL installed on there as well. So those are two important things to look at, and getting a Linux server is usually going to work out best for you. There's no real reason to pay the little bit extra money to have a Microsoft server. So now on to installing a server yourself. And a lot of times you'll find that having the server on your computer, a local server, works really nice hand in hand with having the remote server. Because when we're running things like PHP and MySQL, these are run on the server. So if you want to try and test these pages on your home computer, you can't do that without a server running PHP and MySQL. So if you're used to making regular static web pages with HTML and JavaScript and CSS, you're used to being able to just simply open up the page you're working on in the browser from your computer, and it works perfectly. That's not the case here when we're using server-side languages. So sometimes it's kind of nice to have the server installed on your computer and use that as what we call a testing server before you upload it to the web to be kind of live, or we might call that your production server. So what you can go ahead and do is, if you want, you can download here if you're using Windows or OS X or Linux. They have different versions here. You go ahead and click here and download. I've already gone ahead and done that. I'm using the previous version of Xampp. I'm happy with that one. I don't need to upgrade. They should work just fine. If you're watching our recent posts, I was having some issues with the install of the newest one, but then I realized that it had nothing to do with it being the newest one. There were some things running on my computer that I didn't realize were running, and it was conflicting. So feel free to download this version, and it's pretty simple, straightforward. You pretty much just choose a directory to install it on, and it goes and does its thing. When it's done, you're going to get what's called the Xampp control panel. And this is what it looks like. Yours, if you're going to download the newest one, it's going to look just a little bit different. It's a little fancier looking, but really pretty much have all the same options here. And you want to make sure that if Apache and MySQL are not running already, that they are. So you'd hit start, and if you need to run it as a service, you're going to check this little box. On the newest version, there's a little button instead. Now, in my case, I had an issue where Windows was running some things that were using port 80, which port 80 is pretty essential to running Apache. And so you might look into seeing if any IIS services are running. And there's some good troubleshooting documents around the web if that's an issue for you. But really all you need to do is hit start and it should work. You may need to open up port 80 in your firewall, and 9 times out of 10, if you're using a newer version of Windows, you're going to get a prompt anyways that's going to ask you if you want to allow it, and you're going to want to say yes. So once you've got that up and running, if you want, you can go ahead and click admin here, which is going to take you to a kind of welcome page from Xampp. You might get a kind of intro screen that asks you which language you want to use first. So make sure you pick the appropriate language. Odds are you're not going to come back to this page. You might, if you want to go to phpMyAdmin to work on your database. But you'll notice in the address bar, once I click on this, it's just localhost/phpMyAdmin. So you can easily get to it there. So just really quick, localhost is pretty much the root of your server. Now when you install Xampp, you want to remember where you installed it. If you didn't change the install directory, it's going to be pretty much your C drive or whatever your main drive is on your computer /Xampp. In my case, I put it in a folder called server. So here we're in the server folder. For pretty much everything we're doing, you don't have to worry about any of these other folders except for htdocs. If you open this up, this is pretty much the root folder of your server. So this is where you want to put all your websites that you're working on, and anything you want to do that's going to run PHP or MySQL needs to be put in here. So we're going to go ahead and create a folder in here, and for our purposes you can call this whatever you want, but we're going to call it series. And inside this folder I'm going to create a folder called dynamic. So inside this folder is where all of our work is going to be done. So now if I flip back to the browser, and here after localhost, instead of Xampp, I can type in series, and you're going to see a directory listing here, and we can click on dynamic. And so now this is the folder or directory that ours is going to run in. So once I put a page in here like index.php, it's going to start loading our pages. And if you're using a remote server, your folder most likely is going to be called public_HTML or www. Every once in a while, it might be called htdocs. So, thing to remember is what folder you just created, because that's where you're going to be doing your work. Then also remember how to get to phpMyAdmin, which is phpMyAdmin after localhost. So /phpMyAdmin. These are going to be the two main tools we're going to be using on the server. Now moving on to the IDE, we talked about it very briefly in the first video. But if you're going to follow along with us and use Aptana, just go to Aptana's website, and there should be a download button right here on the right. If not, you can go to products and find that download button as well. So you want to go ahead and download it. Of course, we've already done that and installed it. I use it on many projects I work on. So go ahead and download and install it. It's pretty straightforward again. Just a couple of, click yes to install. Good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and open up Aptana. And the first thing it's going to ask us is to select a workspace. Now if you're strictly going to be working on a remote server, you can pretty much put your workspace anywhere you want. However, if you want to go ahead and run directly off the local server, you can go to Browse, and then we need to find that htdocs folder. So in my case, I'm going to go to the server folder. In your case, you might go to the Xampp, wherever you installed that server that we talked about that earlier. So we're going to go to htdocs, and then I have my series folder and dynamic. I say OK. Now this is going to be my workspace. This is where all my project files are going to go. Now I can say OK, and it's going to tell you it's loading the workspace. You're going to most likely get this welcome screen here. Aptana has a lot of great tools and a lot of great panels here. I'm going to go ahead and minimize most of these though, because we're not going to use these right away. So I'm going to minimize that and minimize this, and we really just want this Project Explorer open. Now let's go ahead and create our project. So we go to File, New, PHP Project, and we're just going to call it Atom CMS. Say Finish, and this is our project folder. Now let's just go ahead and create a file really quick just so we can talk about how that's done. Let's right click, go to New, File, and make sure when you did this you right clicked on your project folder, not the local file system up at the top. And we're just going to call this index.php, and we're going to choose Finish, and here we go. It opened it up here, and I'm going to put a little code in here. So I've got my PHP tags. Now this is really just for an example purpose. Now if you're used to Dreamweaver, if you followed along in our older videos, right away you're going to see that the syntax highlighting is a little different. And this drives me nuts because I've been using Dreamweaver for so long that even simple things like the PHP tags not being the color red bugs me. So neat thing about Aptana is it has a set of themes. So if we go to Window, Preferences, choose Aptana Studio, open that up, go to Themes, then over here on the right for Editor Theme, from this box choose Dreamweaver, and it gets it pretty close. There's a few differences between this and Dreamweaver, but it's pretty close. See there, now my PHP tags are red, and it's a little easier to read. You can definitely go through that theme explorer and poke around and see what theme you like. A lot of people actually like when the background of the editor is black and the text is white or bright colors. That drives me nuts, but I know a lot of people do like that, so you can also do that in there. So we'll go ahead and save this, and again this is really just as an example for the syntax highlighting, and pretty much every tutorial needs to have a hello world example. So this is just going to print hello world to the screen. So now we should be able to go back to our browser and let's go to that folder we created, which was series or whatever you called it, and then dynamic, and you're going to see my Atom CMS folder now. That was created by Aptana for our project. So if I click on this, there you go, hello world. Now this tells us a couple things. One, we set up our project and we found it, so that's cool. But it also shows us that PHP is running. Because if PHP wasn't running, we would have actually seen all of our PHP code written out instead of hello world, because it didn't know what to do with it. So that's good. So if you got this, then we're good to go. So lastly, let's pop over here to GitHub, and this is where I'm going to be putting all the code. Now right now you're seeing all the old code from the first original series that didn't get completed. I'm going to be keeping that here, however it's going to be under branches here in the original here. So as this series moves on, I'm going to be removing all these files from the master branch and start adding what we've been working on. So if you want to follow along and get the code, or if you're curious as to maybe something's not working on your end and you want to make sure that it matches my code, go ahead, come here and get it. Or if you don't even want to type the code, just want to take it, that's up to you. I definitely recommend typing it and following along that way though. So you just go to github.com/thedigicraft/AtomCMS, and next we'll get started.